Hello guys. This is a video on a very important modernist writer, James Joyce. James Joyce was born in Ireland in 1882 and he died in 1941. He was a central figure in modernist prose, and he was born at a time when Irish nationalism was moving into its fiercest and most desperate phase. You can see this phase of Irish nationalism depicted in Joyce's portrait of the artist as a young man. Joyce was deeply interested in the medium and form of his art. He was a formal innovator interested in linguistics, unlike D.H. Lawrence, who was his predecessor. So his interest in the form and experiments with the form and medium of his art paralleled his interest in linguistics. Joyce aimed to leave an impersonal and objective work of art for the reader to interpret. Joyce was born in a well-off Catholic family in Dublin as the first of 15 children, 5 of whom died in infancy. So Joyce was the first of 10 children. And his family, who was well off at the time he was born, became poorer and poorer and progressively declined in fortunes. They moved into poorer homes as well. You can see that in Portrait of the Artist. Joyce, being the eldest child, got a lot of advantages over his siblings. But he actually escaped from his family responsibilities and became an artist. In boyhood, there was a continual decline in his father's fortunes, and this led to changes of homes or abodes throughout his life, his childhood, that is. And he got excellent education at Jesuit institutions like Clongowes and Belvedere, which are also University College later, which are educational institutions that you see in Portrait of the Artist as well. Joyce was meant for priesthood. The family thought he was going to be a priest, but he rejected the prospect of priesthood eventually and even rejected religion altogether. This also you can see in his autobiographical novel, Portrait of the Artist. Joyce was dissatisfied with the narrowness of Irish life, and he rejected religion and his nation and left for Paris. From there, he went on a foreign trip and then returned back to Paris. He studied medicine, which came to nothing, and he returned home to Ireland when his mother was fatally ill and she died. The family situation was bleak, and he was writing and trying to publish his works. He felt excluded from the Dublin literary scene at this time. It was George Russell, the writer, who used the pseudonym A.E., who invited him to contribute a story to Irish Homestead publication, and he contributed the story The Sisters. The Sisters became his first published story, and it was published under the pseudonym Stephen Daedalus. Daedalus, that is how he spelt it at first. Later he changed it to Dedalus. And A.E. appears as a character in Ulysses. Joyce wrote poetry, reviews, short sketches and short stories or epiphanies. Epiphany is a term originally from the Bible, from biblical literature. Epiphany is a sudden revelation. It is a modernist device in James Joyce and Virginia Woolf. And Joyce wrote autobiographical novel Stephen Hero, which was later rewritten and retitled A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. Published for the first time in 1916, years after he wrote it. And he has also written his early short story collection, Dubliners, at this time. Joyce met Nora Barnacle, who became his lifelong companion. And they never married, but he was a lasting influence on his career and life. And he wrote letters to her that was published as Dirty Letters. Joyce at this time traveled in Europe and lived in Zurich in Switzerland until the outbreak of the First World War. He did not lead a very successful life or anything at this time. He had spendthrift habits and drinking bouts. And he sent Dubliners to a publisher in 1905. It was first accepted and then rejected. Why was it rejected? Because it had swear words and references to sexual matters, names of real Dublin establishments. It was very controversial. Thus started a long struggle to publish. Stephen Hero was rewritten in a radically different style by 1912. And Dubliners was finally published in 1914 by the same publisher who turned it down earlier. In the same year, Ezra Pound, who read the first chapter of A Portrait, realized the genius in the book and enthusiastically arranged to publish it in The Egoist, famous journal. A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man first appeared in The Egoist serially. Dubliners was published in 1914. It has 15 short stories organized through thematic symbols. It offers the realistic sketch of the lives of ordinary Dubliners. A realistic sketch of the lives of ordinary Dubliners. It is a close-up of these Dubliners' lives, close-up, a very close picture, zoom-in picture. And Joyce said that he wished to depict the paralysis of his native society. In fact, nothing much happens in any of these stories. There is a paralysis that is depicted because the plots are very minimal. Nothing happens in these plots. The first of the stories is The Sisters. Remember, it was published in Irish Homestead before. In The Sisters, a boy who just barely knew a priest. A priest is an old man, and this small boy talks to the priest. They are friends, and now the priest dies, and the boy goes to meet his sisters, the old man's sisters. There is nothing much they can talk between themselves. It is an absurd situation. Nothing happens in that story. Similarly, Araby is also a story where nothing happens. Characters are failures and situations are frustrated. A boy plans to buy a gift for a girl across the street at a bazaar, but gets there too late. Counterparts is about a clerk who had a bad day at the office, followed by a miserable evening drinking, and he takes it out on his son. Ivy Day in the Committee Room is about a group of election canvassers. They are conversing idly as they wait to be paid. Spiritual paralysis and failure of communication is what characterizes these stories. And these stories are also epiphanic. There are some revelatory moments. Now, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, published in 1916. Stephen Hero, as you know, is the earlier version. It is autobiographical. And it was published while Joyce lived in Zurich in Switzerland. His play Exiles was also published in Zurich. And Ulysses was later published in serial form there. Ulysses appeared in book form when it was published by Sylvia Beach, the owner of Shakespeare and Company, the Parisian bookshop. In A Portrait, you can see moments of epiphany and mythical elements. Myth of Stephen Daedalus and Icarus is blended into the realistic story of Stephen Daedalus. Icarus and his son Daedalus were imprisoned Daedalus and his son Icarus were imprisoned in an island prison, and from there they escaped by the father building wings that he fixed with wax, and the son flew too near the sun and fell into the wax melted. The son fell into the ocean and drowned. That is the mythological story. Like Daedalus, our Stephen Daedalus also wants to fly away from the family that he belongs to, the stifling influences of the family, religion, and nation. So this is the growing up story of the protagonist Stephen Daedalus. And as he grows up, you see his language and sensations changing with his age. He's a very sensitive artist. So this is a Bildungsroman, and because it's about the development of an artist, it's a Kunstlehrroman. Stephen Daedalus is a self-absorbed, sensitive young man like Paul Morrell in Sons and Lovers. Let us look at a character sketch of this his protagonist. It is Joyce's fictional recreation of himself. Stephen Daedalus is an alter ego for James Joyce. All events are filtered through his consciousness. You see everything happening through Stephen Daedalus's consciousness. He's extremely sensitive and imaginative. This boy is sensitive and artistic and imaginative. When he is young, he is shy, and he evolves from a very shy and almost awkward boy to a fiercely independent and brilliant young man. He is the oldest son of Simon and Mary Daedalus. They are Irish Catholics with 9 other children who did not get many of the privileges that Stephen had. This is the story of James Joyce as well. And Stephen finally realizes that Ireland is a trap for him and that he must escape the bonds of family, religion, and country. He escapes from his family, religion, and country. Let us take a deeper look at the novel. First, Stephen's infancy. You see Ireland at the turn of the century. The Daedaluses move into increasingly shabby homes. And they have a governess, Dante, living with them. She's a fanatically Catholic woman. And Uncle Charles is also living with the family. Uncle Charles is an old relative. The novel employs stream of consciousness narrative from a child's perspective. There is baby talk and concrete imagery. The novel begins when the protagonist is an infant, and the infant's baby talk is what characterizes the beginning of the novel. Once upon a time, and a very good time it was, there was a moo cow coming down along the road, and this moo cow that was coming down along the road met a nice and little boy named Baby Takku. This is like a child telling a story, or a story being told to a child, childish language, without formal grammar and structure. And when he is a small boy, there is a neighborhood girl. She's a Protestant girl called Aileen. And Stephen comes home and declares that he's going to marry Aileen. In childish innocence, he says this. He doesn't even know what is marriage. But Dante, who is a furious Catholic, is angry. How dare you marry a Protestant girl? She's scolding this little boy. Look at the absurdity of religion. One by one, the incidents in his life reveal to him the absurdity of religion. How absurd religion is. How absurd nationalism is. And this boy is of school-going age. He's put in Clongowees Wood College. It's actually a Jesuit school. And language changes. From childish language, it has changed into a boyish language. And this boy is homesick. He has never been away from home and he's homesick. Remember, this is the boy who is going to leave home when he's a young man. In school days, he is homesick and he's praying devoutly. Remember, also in his youth, he is going to reject religion. And now, in his school days, he is praying devoutly and he has not yet begun to question religion. Stephen is a shy boy who cannot stand up for himself. Stephen is weak and he is not sure what he wants. He cannot stand up for himself. How do we know? Because one day another boy, Wells, pushes him into the cesspool. Cesspool means sewage pool. And Stephen is not able to do anything against it. He falls into the sewage pool and he is ill at school. He's put in the school clinic and brother Michael cares for the boys in the clinic. Stephen and another boy, Ati, are there. So brother Michael entertains them, reads to them from the newspaper, and one day he reads the news about the death of a man called Charles Parnell. He's an Irish nationalist. And our Stephen remembers Charles Parnell from home. He remembers one incident at home during a Christmas holiday when the Irish nationalist Charles Parnell was excommunicated for marital infidelity. What happened is Charles Parnell is a famous leader of the Irish people. He's an Irish nationalist, and Stephen's father Simon and his friends all respect him. But Charles Parnell went and had an extramarital affair with another woman. This is very wrong according to Christianity, and the church excommunicated Charles Parnell. There is a very emotional quarrel over this at home between Simon Daedalus and his friend John Casey on the one hand, and Dante, the very fierce Catholic, the governess on the other. Dante, being a fierce Catholic, supports the excommunication of Charles Parnell, whereas Simon Daedalus and John Casey are angry that he has been excommunicated. On this day, Stephen remembers that John Casey said, "No God for Ireland. We have had too much God in Ireland. Away with God." Wow, that is heretic. And Stephen is introduced to heresy. Eventually, he will also start thinking like this. He will start rejecting God eventually. This is a picture of Charles Parnell. Slowly, Stephen is growing up and discovering his voice. At Clongawees, one day, the boys steal altar wine. In convent schools, there'll be chapels and there'll be wine there, and the boys steal it and drink it. Very strict school it is. They'll be either expelled or flogged. They are given the choice. Either they'll be thrown out of the school, expelled, or flogged, whipped. Whipping in front of everybody, it's very painful and insulting. The boys are afraid. All of them choose expulsion. Only one boy, Corrigan, chooses flogging. And Stephen thinks, unlike the other boys, what do the other boys think? Mr. Gleason will not flog hard because it will look very bad if he does it. These other boys are already thinking like adults. They have a crooked mind. But Stephen is straightforward. He thinks Mr. Gleason will not flog hard because he is kind. His thought about humanity is very straightforward and good. He is good-hearted. And he is already showing that he is different from the other boys. Father Dolan one day punishes Stephen. A lot of such incidents are said in the novel. Father Dolan is punishing Stephen. What happened was, Stephen was not working. Everybody was working. He was sitting quietly. You know why? Because he has serious eye problem and his glasses were broken. He could not see. That is why Stephen didn't work. But Father Dolan picked him, and as a model for everybody, he punished Stephen. That was unjust because Stephen was actually not able to see. That's why. What did Stephen do? He did not take it quietly. He went and complained to the rector, Father Conmee. And all the boys feel happy. They celebrate. Because he took this step to complain. Before he was weak and he was not even able to do anything against another boy. Now he is going and complaining against Father Dolan. Wow. You see, Stephen is slowly asserting himself. The family at this time is poorer. They moved to a poorer house at Blackrock. And there Uncle Charles goes to church with Stephen. And he prays devoutly like before. But Stephen is different. He has started to question prayer and church and religion. And Stephen and other boys like Aubrey Mills, they all go on adventures together. Stephen feels different from the other boys already. He doesn't enjoy the childish pretensions and adventures anymore. He feels different already. There is more financial trouble in the family, and now Stephen cannot go back to Clongervie School. The family cannot afford it. So he goes to Belvedere. That's also a Jesuit school, but less expensive. And the family moves into a shabby home in Dublin, where Stephen has new urban experiences. And there is a neighborhood girl called Emma. Oh, he has a crush on her. But he doesn't have the guts to talk to her or even write a poem to her. He tries to write a poem, but he is unable to. Then he goes to Belvedere. Stephen is now a teenager and a very reluctant leader. Slowly he is showing leadership qualities, and he has started writing essays and getting prizes. He also does acting at school. There is a Whitsuntide play that all the boys are acting. Some boys are acting. And Stephen at that time talks with his friends, and he feels a little silly about the play, and he does not identify with the other boys. The other boys are a little stupid and immature, but Stephen is more philosophical, intelligent, and mature. Stephen then remembers an incident in the first term. A teacher found heresy in Stephen's essay, and he hadn't meant heresy but liked the idea. Stephen did not actually mean to say anything against God, but he liked the very idea of speaking against God. He is questioning religion. And the boys are discussing poetry, okay? They are discussing Tennyson and Byron. Everybody knows Byron is a better poet. Tennyson was rather superficial. He did not deal with issues very deeply. But Byron was a heretic. He talked against religion. So Stephen says Byron is the better poet. But the other boys are afraid to say this because Byron was irreligious. So they say Tennyson is the better poet. And these boys even come to fist fights. They start physically fighting over this. And Stephen feels sorry for the other boys because they are cowards. They are afraid even to say something to their friends against religion. He feels sorry. He doesn't hate Heron for his cowardice. He feels superior to them. And he feels rather silly about this religious play that they are enacting. And at this time, the family is in financial trouble. And Stephen and his father Simon are traveling to Cork to auction some of the family's possessions. And this strange journey, Stephen feels embarrassed by his father's nostalgia and trite advice. Stephen is far above his father. You see this in Ulysses also. Stephen and Simon are characters in Ulysses also. There also Stephen doesn't connect with Simon. And he's searching for a father figure whom he finds in Leopold Bloom. And when they talk about Uncle Charles who has died, Stephen is now a teenager and he can't remember his childhood or Uncle Charles. Images of death seem unreal. Childhood memories seem dim. And the auction is happening in an old college. There is an anatomy lab there. Zoology students used to study anatomy here. And there on a desk, Stephen finds the word fetus. Somebody had carved it. And this word suddenly leads to an epiphany. He is remembering a woman's, fetus means women's body and sex. And this is an epiphanic moment for Stephen. After this, he indulges in sex. And suddenly he feels the whole class, remember this is an old college. He sees the whole class coming alive in front of him. And after this, he has growing preoccupation with sex. At this time, he wins money in an essay contest and spends all this money on his family and himself. He wants to feel connected with his family, but he feels lonely. He cannot connect with his family. And at this time, he feels sexuality intensely, and he has his first sexual encounter with a prostitute. For the first time, he has sex with a prostitute, and then he indulges in sex and all other vices. From a boyish interest in adventure, he has changed into romance and physical sex. He's growing up. He's entering his youth. And Stephen falls into a variety of sins at this time. There's a period of deep confusion and spiritual paralysis. This is the result of his first rebellion against Catholic virtues. Deep confusion and spiritual paralysis. He's rebelling against Catholicism. That is in the form of indulging in vices. He recognizes sin, but is indifferent towards the idea of eternal damnation. And at school, there are 3 days of retreat at Belvedere. 3 days of retreat. Father Arnold is giving sermons about sin and how if you indulge in sins, you'll go to hell. He's talking about the tortures of hell. Oh my God. Stephen gets nightmares. And he goes to a far-off church, a church far off from his school, and he confesses there. And after this, he feels different. He stops all his sinful engagements. And this is how James Joyce beautifully describes his confession. His sins trickled from his lips one by one, trickled in shameful drops from his soul, festering and oozing like a sore, a squalid stream of vice. The last sins oozed forth, sluggish, filthy. And Stephen becomes fanatically pious and imposes self-discipline. Stephen is very pious and religious and imposes self-discipline on himself. And the school director notices this very pious boy. Wow, he will be very good priestly material, the school director thinks, and gives him one lecture on the advantages of becoming a priest. And Stephen listens to this lecture and he's confused whether he should be a priest or not. He thinks and takes a walk in a lane. That is when he suddenly smells rotten cabbages. Wow! Strong smell, bad smell. But he thinks, epiphanic moment, yes, this is what I want, the physical smells of life. He doesn't want the stale odor of the Clongawees halls, where all the windows are closed probably. He wants life. He chooses life over priesthood. And then Stephen is growing up. He's about to enter university, but he's very restless. He imagines himself escaping like the mythical Daedalus who makes a pair of wings to escape from his prison. He sits on the library steps and watches the birds in the sky. Towards the end of the novel, we'll see that. Not now, later. And there is also, when he goes to the beach, he sees a beautiful girl wading in the water. This is a beautiful epiphany. He thinks, I want these sensations of life. Now Stephen is at the university. After a few years, the family is even poorer. And he's in the university. You see one day in his university life. Like there is the description of one day in the life of Quentin in William Faulkner's Sound and the Fury. Stephen's one day in university is described. Cranley, his friends, we meet a lot of his friends. Cranley is one of his best friends. Lynch, this is a character we meet in Ulysses also. Lynch listens to Stephen's theory of aesthetics. Davin is a simple boy with a love for Ireland, and Stephen cannot stand this. Temple is a pretentious boy who secretly admires Stephen. And McCann is a stupid boy. He tells Stephen that Stephen is antisocial, anti-democratic. Why? because Stephen refused to sign a petition for world peace. If you don't forward this email, you are antisocial. If you don't sign a petition, you are antisocial. How stupid. Stephen is above all these people. Stephen has no interest in Irish nationalism. His interest is in beauty and aesthetics. He is an artist and he keeps talking about Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas Aquinas. Not St. Thomas Aquinas, I think, just Thomas Aquinas. Anyway, Stephen tells Lynch famously, one famous sentence he says, "The artist, like the God of creation, remains within or behind or beyond or above his handiwork, invisible, refined out of existence, indifferent, paring his fingernails." The artist should be impersonal. He should be outside his work. He should be behind or beyond or above his handiwork. This is the very expression of T.S. Eliot's theory of impersonality. We have T.S. Eliot's theory of impersonality in tradition and the individual talent. The artist should not be part of the work. He should not show his personality in the work. He should not show his emotions in the work. He should stand apart or aloof from the work. Don't you know that? Now, Stephen sees Emma, that girl he likes, and he's speechless as ever, but finally he's able to write a poem for Emma. He titles it too, E.C. Emma Clare, that is his name, her name. And then Stephen sits on the library steps, dreamily watching the birds flying through the air like Daedalus. Like Daedalus, he wants to fly away and escape. He talks to Cranley about Easter rituals. His mother, Stephen's mother, has been asking him to come home and take part in the Easter rituals. Stephen doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to go home. He doesn't want to take part in Easter rituals. He does not believe in religion anymore. And he cannot compromise just to please his mother. He talks to Cranley about religion, politics, family, Ireland. And Cranley tells him, yes, you should go home. And when Cranley says that, Stephen realizes, yeah, that is not what I want to do. He decides not to go. Sometimes when you talk to your best friends, you will understand what not to do. Because what they advise will be opposite of what you want to do. He recognizes finally his need to be independent. Stephen decides to be independent. He wants to leave and escape and be on his own. And the last of the book, the end of the book, shows his diary entries as he decides to leave Ireland. The final days he spends in Ireland are documented in these diary entries. That is how the novel ends, with his diary entries. And before he leaves, he is also finally able to talk to Emma. And like Daedalus, he makes his way out of the trap of Ireland. This is a portrayed cloud made by Emma Sloan, somebody, I don't know who it is, but it's useful. I'm showing you this because you should also write all the main points, the content words like this, and make a cloud so that you will remember and be able to learn easily. Okay, you know what happened? I recorded for 3 hours James Joyce very much in detail just a while ago. Now the time is like 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the morning, and I was doing this from 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock. And you know what happened? After I recorded everything at a stretch and I tried to save my recording, I found that there is no recording. Recording shows 0 KB. So I'm not recording at a stretch like that. I'm cutting the video here. I hope you enjoyed. I'll come back with Ulysses in another video. Thank you.